Hello, and welcome to this podcast on the recently notified GST amnesty scheme. My name is Manish Demla, and I am a partner in the disputes resolution practice of Kocher & Co. in Gurgaon. I am joined by my colleague Reena Kher, who is a senior partner in our international trade and indirect tax practice. Welcome, Reena.
Hello.
So, Reena, I was curious to know what is the rationale behind the introduction of this amnesty scheme?
Well, obviously, the rationale is to reduce the litigation which is now pending since 2017-18. And this litigation has really come about because the government has been slow in setting up the tribunal. As you know, the GST Act was introduced in 2017 July, and 7 years later, and we still do not have a tribunal. So, in the absence of a grievance redressal mechanism, the appeals and disputes are piling up. The limitation for filing the appeal has been extended up to 3 months from the date of setting up of the tribunal. So effectively what will happen is if middle of 2025 the tribunal is set up, on day one itself there's going to be a huge pendency, and it's to address this problem I think that the government has come out with the amnesty scheme, which is granting waiver of interest and penalty, and it is hoping that the taxpayers get attracted toward the scheme. And on day one we are not going to have the type of surge which the government is worried about at the tribunal level.
That's really insightful, Reena. So, what kind of disputes or cases are covered by this scheme?
Well, the government has offered the scheme primarily for notices issued under Section 73. And when we say 73, it means cases where there is no allegation of fraud, suppression, or misstatement. The amnesty scheme is not extended to cases of wrongful refunds, late fees, penalties, and even to imports where IGST is paid. So it's restricted in its scope, but it's covering a large period that's from 2017-18 to 1920. So it's a long period of time.
So, Reena, I understand from your response that Section 74 demands are not covered by the scheme. So, what happens to those demands?
Well, in fact, before I answer your question, I want to tell you that taxpayers are being faced increasingly with demands under 74 because the department is making allegations of fraud suppression at the drop of a hat. And therefore, there are so many notices which are out there under 74. Clearly, the government's intent is to cover those also, and it has now recently been clarified that in case of 74 notices, the taxpayers can challenge the notices either in adjudication or in appellate proceedings or even before a court of law, where they can challenge the allegation of the extended period, that is fraud, suppression, misstatement. If they are successful in their challenge, then the notice will be deemed to have been issued under Section 73, in which case the taxpayer will again become eligible under the scheme. So you need not challenge the entire demand. You will need to challenge only the allegation for the extended period, that is the fraud suppression. And if the taxpayer succeeds on that, the scheme will be available.
And what is the procedure for availing the benefit of the scheme?
Overall, the procedure is that in respect of 73 notices, the payment of tax has to be made by 31st of March 2025, and the application has to be filed within 3 months thereof, that is 30th June 2025. But like I said, for cases of 74 where you have to get a re-adjudication, there is a longer time limit of 6 months from the date of the re-adjudication order, both for payment and for application. So obviously the intent is to somehow also cover 74 cases.
Reena, thank you for outlining the procedure. But what happens after the tax has been paid and application has been filed?
Well, Manish, one of three things can happen. The best outcome is, of course, the officer passes an order within 3 months accepting the application and granting the waiver of interest and penalty. The second possibility is that the officer entertains doubts regarding the eligibility to the scheme, in which case the officer will issue a notice, grant a hearing, and then take a decision whether the scheme is available to the taxpayer or not. This order is unfortunately not appealable. The third possibility, which is often a very likely possibility, is that the officer does absolutely nothing, in which case, after lapse of 3 months, it will be a deemed acceptance of the application and benefit of the scheme will be extended to the taxpayer. So, this is the broad possibilities which can happen.
And suppose interest and penalty has already been paid. Can a taxpayer seek refund of those under the amnesty scheme?
Not at all. There are no refunds with the government. It's an amnesty scheme for waiver. So if you have already paid prior to opting for the scheme, it's your bad luck. You don't get any money back. But in case you have not paid, then you can go for a waiver. So really, there is no refund under the scheme at all.
And is the scheme also applicable to disputes or violation relating to financial years other than 2017-18 and 18-19?
Scheme is restricted to 2017-18 to 19-20, those 3 years
3 years.
only. There are no doubts cases where notices are covering multiple tax periods, even periods beyond the scheme. In that case, you can opt for the scheme, but you have to pay the entire tax, not only for the period covered by the scheme, but even for the period outside the scheme. Now, the difficulty with that is that you will be forced to pay tax for periods beyond 1920, but you will get no interest, no waiver of interest or penalty for those periods. So perhaps taxpayers will have to take a call on a case to case basis. Is it worthwhile paying tax for the periods outside the scheme?
And Reena, what happens to the pending litigation? Is it stayed for the time being, or does it continue, or do you think that every date that comes, it will be adjourned until the decision under the amnesty scheme is taken?
Well, the scheme provides that all pending litigation must be concluded by the end of the period of the scheme. So there are two possibilities. Either the appeals will be decided before the scheme comes to an end, or the litigant will have to withdraw their appeals or petitions.
And what is your overall sense regarding the success of the scheme?
Well, I think taxpayers had hoped for more because earlier, when the schemes had come, there was some concession in the tax also. So, some of the earlier schemes, for instance, had 30% tax to be paid or 50% tax to be paid. Those were really attractive schemes, and taxpayers used to rush for those, and in fact, used to wait for these schemes. Here, there is no concession in the tax, but only in the interest and penalty. Here also, I do feel that this scheme will be successful because when we look at a period 2017-18, 18-19, interest liability has become equal to or more than the principal tax amount. So even taxpayers who may be wanting to contest the demands may choose to pay and finish it because they are getting a rebate of the interest, which is very substantial. I think there is a good possibility that there will be a lot of interest in the trade to get rid of these old litigations and start afresh, for the future.
Thank you, Reena, for your insights. And I hope that our viewers will find this of value. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish.